I just received a full briefing from our emergency response teams, including FEMA. Obviously, everybody is aware at this point that this is going to be a big and powerful storm.
More than 2 million people have been evacuated along the East Coast. An estimated 26 million people will be affected by it today and in the coming days.
We are announcing that we are going to close the Holland Tunnel and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel.
Common sense says you should start taking precautions. Get ready just in case.
This is a record surge of water that we're witnessing right now.
60 million Americans will feel its power.
Creeks, now raging rivers.
Take a look at the flooding situation over here.
All of a sudden, they had whitecaps going through the yard.
Sustained winds here are easily over 30 miles an hour.
Hurricane Irene has unleashed itself on the east coast of America.
Our town is devastated. We've all lost our houses.
A fire has destroyed at least 50 homes.
The Battery Tunnel in Lower Manhattan, this gets you out of the city. The tunnel is totally flooded.
It was beyond anything I'd ever seen, and certainly beyond anything I'd ever imagined.
I really didn't know how this community was going to build back up.
This was my place of refuge. Where am I going to go from here?
There's still a lot of cleanup to do, and I'm confident, as Governor Cuomo said, that we're going to be able to do it. But it's going to require everybody focus on getting the job done. We are going to be here until the rebuilding is complete.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the state capitol. Let me begin by introducing Congressman Paul Tonko, who is a great representative, represents this area, but he was also a true champion for New York when we were fighting for the supplemental appropriation that we needed to do the work we'll be talking about today. Let's give him a round of applause, Congressman Paul Tonko. Speaker Sheldon Silver, who needs no introduction in this room, Senate Leader Dean Skelos, and Independent Democrat Conference Leader Jeff Klein, my colleagues who have been working together on this plan that we'll present today. I want to thank them for their cooperation. I want to thank the members of their conferences for their consultation. As we go through this rebuilding plan, you'll see it affects the majority of the state. It's quite specific, and if it wasn't for the partnership we have with the legislature, the plan wouldn't be as good as the plan is. So let's give them a round of applause. And it's a special pleasure, obviously, to be able to introduce the Vice President here in the state capitol. This is what we call the Red Room, Mr. Vice President. This is the formal governor's office. It gives you a sense of the splendor that this Capitol represents. We just went through a renovation, restoring the Capitol to its original luster, so we're very proud that you could be here with us after all the work is done. It's a personal pleasure for me to be with the Vice President again. We worked together in different capacities. When I was the HUD Secretary and he was a Senator, we did good work in his home state of Delaware, so it's a special treat that he can now come and visit my state. The Vice President's son was also a colleague of mine, General Bo Biden, and we worked together as Attorneys General, and that was a special treat. I could now launch into a whole series of stories about fathers and sons and comparisons, but that would get us all into trouble, so I'm going to stay away from that. I'm glad the Vice President could join with us today. We were chatting inside. Tomorrow is the day of the State of the State. The State of the State is when the governor has an opportunity to lay out his or her vision for the state's agenda going forward. And we will have a robust State of the State. Originally, we were contemplating talking about this rebuilding plan in the State of the State. But as you'll see, it is so complex and so intricate and so large. It really deserves a presentation and time of its own. So we decided to talk about the reconstruction plan today. Tomorrow we'll have the rest of the State of the State. And the Vice President's joining us because, as you'll see as we go through it, this wouldn't happen without the federal government and without their support for the supplemental appropriation, without the federal government cutting the bureaucracy the way they did, and doing the coordination that made today possible. This was a special challenge for us because it called for us to literally reimagine the state in light of what we went through with Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, Storms Irene and Lee, and taking those lessons and taking really that trauma and reshaping our vision of New York through that experience. We call it Reimagining New York for a new reality, because we are now facing a new reality after what we went through. And this represents a year of work. We've had commissions that were working on putting together a plan. As I mentioned, we worked with the legislature, we worked with our federal colleagues, and have come up with this blueprint. I've been governor for 3 years. In those 3 years, there have been 9 federally declared disasters, which is an unprecedented experience for the state. And we don't even know what lies ahead with 2014. We've had a tumultuous beginning here. We're now in the middle of a storm in western New York that is going to be historic by all accounts. So extreme weather is the new reality. Like it or not, what caused it is a separate discussion for a separate day. But the reality is extreme weather, and we have to deal with it. The new reality even changes every day. Today they're talking about polar vortexes in the newspaper, right? So it's almost on a weekly basis there are new discoveries when it comes to extreme weather. And extreme weather brings extreme damage. Superstorm Sandy shut down New York, affecting 11 million people. And it shut down almost every major system in New York. The transportation system literally was underwater, and the subway tunnels. The electric grid went down, and that's a dark lower Manhattan, mid-Manhattan down. The fuel system collapsed. It had never happened before. Nobody even understood how the system fully worked. But the fuel system collapsed, creating ancillary problems for days. The telecommunications system was overloaded. That's the Verizon building in Manhattan. Most of their equipment was in the basement of that building. That's where the main computers were. And as you can obviously see, they were all flooded. The shoreline itself has been changed after Hurricane Sandy. This was a Fire Island inlet that didn't exist before the storm. These all happened at once, and the consequences lasted well after the water receded. Not in modern times has an event caused such broad damage in such a densely populated area. And we talk about Superstorm Sandy downstate. Upstate New York had storms Irene and Lee in 2011, which were every bit as devastating to upstate New York as Sandy was to downstate New York. And the two storms were a staggering 1-2 punch. Route 73 in the North Country was just washed away. Downtown areas in the southern tier just became filled with water. Prattsville and Schoharie Valley, literally 100-year-old homes that stood just fine for 100 years were then just washed off their foundations. Southern tier, we lost businesses, we lost farms. It was devastating. And as much as we were humbled by Mother Nature, we were also awakened and challenged to find ways to reimagine New York. We did not deceive ourselves, Mr. Vice President, to say that this is once in a lifetime. We are prepared for situations like this again, and we want to educate ourselves. That mandates that we revisit old assumptions and old decisions, because in retrospect, through the lens of extreme weather, many of these original decisions don't work. For example, this is a picture of Lower Manhattan, 1609. That was the original landmass. New Yorkers, especially downstate, became consumed with adding to the landmass and growing Manhattan on fill, especially in the Lower Manhattan area. Even as late as the 1900s, we were building up, but we were also continuing to increase the landmass. 2011, the landmass of downtown Manhattan is basically doubled by fill on both the east and the west side, doubling the original landmass. This came at a cost. It replaced what was a gradually sloping waterfront. The harbor lost 80% of the tidal wetlands. We lost 200,000 acres of oyster reefs, which were also a natural flood protection. And while we created more commercial space, we actually made the island more vulnerable to the water that surrounds it. If you look, Mr. Vice President, what's really fascinating to me, the Sandy surge literally covered all the man-made area and went up almost exactly to the original line of Manhattan Island, filling in all the man-made structures. This is a picture of Ground Zero that night, which was totally flooded. Ground Zero is all man-made. In the construction, they came across a sailing ship from the Revolutionary War that was there as fill on the Ground Zero site. When Manhattan was filling and building and growing, it made sense. In light of extreme weather, it looks different. To compound matters, not only were we increasing land along the waterfront, we then wound up putting our critical infrastructure there. Power plants and substations we located along the coast. The wastewater treatment plants we located along the coast, very often on fill. The fuel terminals and the refineries were located along the coast. The airports, LaGuardia Airport originally was a marine air terminal. It was for planes that came in by water. So the critical infrastructure then gets placed on this area that is already vulnerable. Not only did we build out into the sea, but Manhattan especially, which is relatively small, we were building up, we also had to build down. So we built a phenomenal engineering marvel under the ground in Manhattan. In a flooding scenario, this is devastating. There are parts of Manhattan that go down 15 stories. If you flood the top of Manhattan, you fill those 15 stories. There's no way to even pump the water out. So that's the New York that we built. And when we made those decisions, it made sense. But again, it's time to now reimagine New York. And the federal government's action and the $60 billion supplemental gave us the means to actually do this kind of extensive redesign and reimagining. We have done a wholesale reimagination of the state and the fundamental services. We start with weather detection because we need an early, accurate, and localized weather information system. I can't tell you how frustrating and how dangerous it is not to have the accurate weather information on a timely basis. We have been in situations where we've deployed equipment to the wrong end of the state because we relied on weather predictions that turned out not to be true. New York State has 27 sites where the weather is detected. That then feeds the National Weather Service. We want to have the best weather detection system in the country, which would have 125 stations, up from the 27 stations, and much more sophisticated weather stations. These weather stations would determine not just the traditional criteria, but also air, soil, radiation. They could tell us when a flood is coming. They would then communicate with our Homeland Security, National Weather Service, and the University at Albany, and also to the public. So we would have information on a real-time basis that is accurate. In terms of early detection of flood risk, road icing, power grid threat, wind events, man-made hazards, it is essential that we have this kind of information, and we believe it will save lives and protect property. Transportation system, we have to redesign it, starting with the subway system. We're going to do the most fundamental redesign to the subway system since it was created over 100 years ago. And we're going to retrofit the entire system, every facet of the system, protecting the train yards, sealing the tunnels. What you're looking at in this picture is an experimental plug for a subway tunnel. That white plug actually inflates to close the opening at a subway tunnel to keep the water from filling the subway tunnel. We have over 540 openings into the subway system. And our challenge is to come up with a way to close all 540 openings before a flood and before the system fills. That will start with tunnels, retrofitting all the stairway openings that go down into the system, upsizing pumps, and creating ventilation closures. In upstate New York, the problem is redesigning roads and bridges to be flood resistant. We have a problem on the upstate bridges on what's called scour, where rocks and stones have eroded the foundations. It is a major threat. The consequences have been destructive. Many of our old bridges were designed at a different time. We have a bridge in Albany, 1866. It's still in service today. It was not designed for this kind of weather. Under this program, we're going to redesign, repair, replace 100 bridges across upstate New York with state-of-the-art design that is ready to deal with the extreme weather. Bridges like Route 32 over the Mohawk, 213 at Roundout Creek, Whitney Point, Wallkill River. Our airports were, LaGuardia Airport was totally underwater and was shut down. Again, they're located on the water. We have a whole new system of protection for the airports. The energy system, as we discussed inside, the energy system goes down, it compounds everything. You can't do the recovery work, you can't do the restoration work because no one has power. And we learned that lesson the hard way. Once again, we located the power systems along the coast, and the power systems went down when there was coastal flooding. We're going back now, especially on Long Island. County Executive Ed Mangano is here. He's in the picture, smiling. We are raising all the substations, especially on Long Island, so they're out of the flood. We have a $1.5 billion transformation, including hardening the underground critical lines, a network automation system, and a customer communication system so customers know when the power is coming back on and what the time frame is. We're also launching something we're excited about, which is a new microgrid system. So a community can have a separate independent power system, and if the main system goes down, the microgrid system can take over. Wastewater protection turned out to be a major problem for us, especially in Nassau County, the Bay Park pumping system. It's an issue that County Executive Mangano had to deal with and Senator Skelos had to deal with. Their main pumping station was 9 feet underwater. It dumped 200 million gallons of raw sewage into the water, and there was absolutely nothing we could do about it. The electrical system was destroyed. The plant engines were destroyed. So improving those, protecting them, dikes, levees, movable flood walls to make sure that doesn't happen again. Coastal protection, 90% of New Yorkers live within 5 miles of the coastline. We have to think in different terms, fundamentally different terms, about our relationship to the coast. The ocean is still moving in, and it's reclaiming the shoreline. We need to do more in terms of tidal protection. This is Jamaica Bay. The bay floods, and it enters into the residential communities that surround the bay. We're doing a natural green infrastructure protection where we're actually putting back 150 acres of tidal wetlands that we call maritime forests, natural infrastructure that we had removed at one point, so their natural protections in the bay are put back. Red Hook, Brooklyn, is probably one of the most aggressive situations for us. We call it a complete protection system where we'll put in natural infrastructure, movable walls, and elevate roadways because Red Hook was probably one of the most vulnerable areas in New York City. Places like Staten Island, Oakwood Beach, we're buying out a community of 321 homes, and we're going to restore that land to a natural wetland because we built, frankly, where we shouldn't have built. We put homes on land that belonged to Mother Nature, and she reclaimed it. We learned the lesson, and we'll make that land a natural buffer. Again, Staten Island, South Shore natural infrastructure, replacing what Mother Nature had there in the first place. Additionally, we have projects all along the coast, Nassau and Suffolk, all along the southern coast of Long Island, which is one of the main vulnerabilities for us. We have dozens of programs all across upstate New York that are unique to that area. Schoharie, flash flood monitoring system. Amsterdam, we're reconstructing the flood wall. Troy, a 1-mile-long seawall built in 1916. Tioga County, early warning gauge systems, Erie Canal, flood warning system, etc. Specific projects for specific needs all across upstate New York. We're revisiting the way we design homes because we've seen the damage by our traditional design. This part of the country, you don't think about building homes on stilts. Other parts of the country, they do. We're going to revisit it, and there are many communities where building on piers makes sense now in light of the extreme weather, and we're going to be incorporating that into our design and into our code. We have $1.5 billion in housing reconstruction all across the state. Community reconstruction program, which we are excited about. Not only was the federal government and the state government designing reconstruction, we also said to the communities that were hardest hit, you organize yourself and tell us how we can help you, and let a community come up with its own plan. That's worked very well. We've done 102 communities thus far. We're going to be doing a second round of the 22 additional communities that were hit very hard by the storm. And this gives a community, it puts their destiny back in their own hands, and it gives them a sense of control and a sense of power. In terms of emergency management and response, we have to be ready for anything, and we've worked very hard on redesigning our emergency response. We have the first ever statewide training program for all emergency management personnel. So everyone literally learned from the same book, and whether they're a county official, a town official, or a state official, everyone had the same basic training, so everyone has the same protocol. We worked with a number of universities to put together a resiliency institute to study the storm, study the damage, and tell us how to rebuild in light of that. We want to take it a step further this year. We want to form a college of emergency preparedness, homeland security, and cybersecurity. It would be the first in the nation, believe it or not. There are colleges that have programs in emergency preparedness, but no college of emergency preparedness. I believe this is going to be a need in the future. I believe it's going to be growing, and we want to have the first college. The state university system will build it, and we want it here in the state of New York. We learned the hard way about the system, fuel system, and problems in the fuel delivery system. We are the first state to establish a strategic fuel reserve. We set up a reserve of 3 million gallons on Long Island. We're going to do that statewide. So if the fuel delivery system is stopped for whatever reason, which we went through during Sandy, we will have an emergency supply all across the state. One of the other things we did in downstate after Sandy is we mandated that certain gas stations have backup power. Because on the fuel system, the delivery stopped. We had fuel in the tanks in the gas stations, but we couldn't get the fuel out because the power was off. So we mandated and helped fund generators, backup generators for gas stations, and we have 1,000 on downstate New York and Long Island. We're going to do that statewide. So we'll identify critical evacuation routes in upstate New York, and gas stations on those routes or within 1/2 of a mile will have to have backup power. So we'll have the strategic reserves. We'll also have generators for those stations so we can access the fuel in those stations. We're also going to start having an emergency license plate dedicated just to emergency management personnel and first responders. So in the case of an emergency, when we say only emergency responders on the road, accessing the fuel sites, et cetera, we'll be able to easily identify the appropriate vehicles, authorized vehicles, with a special plate, what we call a red plate, for obvious reasons. We're also going to start the first ever Citizen First Responder Corps. Many people, Mr. Vice President, didn't know what to do in the emergency. They were looking for information, they weren't prepared, the anxiety was very high. We want to have the most trained and prepared citizens in the United States. What we're going to do is start a training program offered by the National Guard at no cost to the citizens, and our goal is to train 100,000 New Yorkers what to do in case of an emergency. And the concept will be the first responder in your own home, on your own block. If you're informed and you have the appropriate equipment, then you can help your family, you can help your block, and you'll have a sense of confidence in where you are, because it all starts at the home and radiates out. If we get 100,000 New Yorkers trained, that'll be a major asset for us going forward. In total, more than 1,000 projects, more than $16 billion that will build a reimagined New York. What we went through was horrendous, but at least we want to learn from it and make sure that when and if something like it happens again, we're better prepared for it. We look forward to working with the federal partners in this effort. We are extraordinarily grateful for the assistance and the kindness and the support you've given us. The President was on the scene. The support for that supplemental appropriation was priceless. I'm proud of the good work done by the team here and the legislature here, but none of it would have been possible if we didn't have the funding from the federal government. So with that, we give you a heartfelt thank you. We thank you for being here today, and we thank you for being with us over this past year, which was a very, very difficult period for the people of the state of New York. Welcome to Albany, sir.
Governor, well, thank you. This presentation was worth the trip. Let me begin by thanking Paul for being so steadfast in the House when we were having a discussion inside. I've been in the Senate a long time and Vice President for a while now. And sometimes our fellow colleagues in other parts of the country don't have the same empathy and sympathy for disasters that occur on the East Coast as we on the East Coast consistently have for disasters that happen in the Midwest and the Far West. And so Paul and the New York delegation had their hands full. But they also had an extremely powerful voice in and Governor Cuomo and the leadership of your House and Senate here. And as the governor pointed out, you've been through some very tough times, upstate and downstate, over the last 5 years. And the destruction caused by Sandy was over $32 billion just to your state of New York. I must tell you, I spent almost as much time in the Situation Room with the President and with FEMA and with the military commanders, and I mean the military commanders, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in following, dealing with, and trying to respond to the urgent needs that stretched from my state of Delaware all the way up through Rhode Island. We had many conversations on that telephone. We'd have the governor on the phone with his colleagues, his fellow governors, and as we tried to figure out how to deal with this mammoth superstorm. And I must tell you, I'm proud to say, I watched the president cut through red tape that has never been cut through before, ordering the United States military to act and get generators out onto Long Island and get generators out in Manhattan when the question was, well, we're not sure we can do it. He said, do it, we'll worry about it later. But that was the attitude. That was the attitude of everybody involved. And Governor, I want to thank you for the leadership you provided. You were a calm voice among 6 or 7 governors on those conference calls, which probably seemed interminable to you. But you were a calming voice. And in the aftermath of Sandy, the president asked me to spend some time. I traveled the entire coast, starting from Delaware, New Jersey, up New York on a helicopter, came into New York Harbor, both sides of the harbor, witnessed the devastation within a day after things had, quote, settled. I went into those subways. I observed the watermarks as high as the mantle on that fireplace. I watched the total destruction. I looked at the millions of gallons of water that came pouring through the elevator shafts as well as through the stairways descending into the subways. I witnessed and observed that almost all of the infrastructure needed to propel the transportation system, the electric grid, was literally underwater and demolished. In the aftermath of that superstorm, I also witnessed something else. I witnessed the incredible determination of your governor and your delegation to do something about it, but not just to build. It wasn't just, we in the administration weren't just using catchphrases. We talked about rebuilding, but rebuilding better, rebuilding to a new and different standard. And I remember going into that PATH train tunnel where there was 6 or 8 feet of water still, and hearing an engineer who happened to be there talk about not only was that destroyed, but the locomotives were destroyed, the trains were destroyed, and as I said, it was an amazing thing to watch. I watched the financial heartbeat of this nation submerged. The stock exchange closing for 2 days because of weather. It hadn't happened since 1888. I visited with some of your constituents, Governor, who lived in brownstones in Lower Manhattan, who thought, "What the hell do I need insurance for? I mean, I don't need flood insurance. Why would I ever need that?" Realizing that they were devastated, they've lost everything, and they had no insurance, and the cost of their residence in order to be restored was phenomenal by every other American standard because the cost of real estate in Manhattan. I sat with a 70-year-old woman who had lived there her whole life, very sophisticated lady, absolutely, thoroughly, totally devastated. I'll never forget what she said. She said, I never imagined in my wildest dreams anything like this could happen in Manhattan. And so, but again, I also saw the determination of those firefighters, first responders, beyond the political class. These guys and women were amazing. They've lost their homes. They lost what they had. And they're out there trying to make things right, trying to get generators in hospitals working, trying to make sure that they can turn the lights on, trying to make sure that you can get people evacuated. I mean, it's really a remarkable thing. But New Yorkers have become used to seeing that kind of courage and that kind of dedication. But along with the New York delegation, the governor fought for the supplemental, and the first $12 billion of that supplemental that has been deployed, $6 billion has been deployed to the state of New York. And we've seen what some of that money is going to, or all of that money will be going to, and much more in terms of rebuilding, but reimagining New York. So I really have just basically 4 things to say, 4 points to make. The first one is, reiterate what the governor said. It used to be during the, I've been an elected official for a while, we used to rebuild after disasters, and my state has had many disasters, my little state of Delaware, particularly because of hurricanes. And you'd say, we're going to rebuild to the status quo ante. We're going to put you back in the same place you were in before the storm. That's not the standard in the 21st century. That cannot be the standard. We have to rebuild in a way that you will not be victimized by a similar storm again. Because if we don't, we're just wasting money. And we're essentially engaging in false advertising. And what we're doing is restoring you to your situation that existed before the storm. The old model of the 20th century is gone. And you've seen an overwhelming demonstration of how clearly the governor and his colleagues understand that it's gone. Sean Donovan, a New Yorker, our Secretary of Housing, I think he's first rate. You trained him well.
Thank you.
He used the phrase, he said, if we build smart, if we build resilience into communities, we can live along the coast. Put another way, if we don't build smart, if we don't build resiliency into communities, we're not going to be able to, in the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years, live along the coast. Manhattan is like much of my state. It is essentially at sea level. You don't have much of an option. Now, I know there's global warmer deniers. I'm not going to get into that debate. But the reality is this is going to continue to happen. And so one of the things that impressed me the most, Governor, is your foresight here and your ingenuity, not only in deciding that you have to do the obvious, take your energy grid and essentially raise it off the ground, but set up these microgrids. That's the kind of thinking we need from other governors. That's the kind of thinking we need around the country. The second point I'd like to make is that as devastating as these natural disasters are, my mother, God love her, an old Irish lady named Jean Finnegan Biden, used to say, out of everything bad that would happen to you, Joey, out of everything terrible that happens, something good will come if you look hard enough. Well, the truth is, there was a terrible devastation. But an awful lot of good is going to come and has come from this. 40,000 people lost their jobs in New York City alone as a consequence of this. Businesses were shut down. You saw, as you point out, the transportation infrastructure was devastated, the power grid, et cetera. But since then, 120,000 folks in that area have found themselves, have gotten small business loans, $52 million worth. They're going back to work, rebuilding their businesses. But in the process, just the rebuilding that's gone on so far, 200,000 new jobs decent jobs you can raise a middle-class family on, where you're not getting paid minimum wage, or have occurred already in rebuilding just here in New York, without mentioning what's going on in New Jersey and in Rhode Island and all the other states that are affected. Rebuilding will make New York also a hell of a lot more competitive in the 21st century. It's not just replacing the infrastructure that has been destroyed. We talked about this, the Montague Street Tunnel, which is 65,000 riders, I'm told, every day between Manhattan and Brooklyn, 93 years old, like almost all the tunnels you saw there. Not only should they be modernized for reasons relating to protecting them, but for security reasons as well. And so, just one little example. All of the electrical power, all of the wiring was encased in tiles, in tile. It's all being replaced, over 30,000 feet of wiring, but it's going to be in reinforced ductwork, metal ductwork. It's not penetrable. 200,000 feet of 21st century communications cables that are more water resistant are going to replace the old lead power cables that were destroyed. So it's not just what you have to have at the level of where the train runs. Not only are you replacing it, you're making it better, so God forbid this happens again, you're in a much better position to sustain the damage or to not absorb the damage that occurred before. The third point I want to make is it's not enough to replace just what's been damaged by the natural disaster. We are in a situation where we have to, once again, act like America. I was with John Kerry this morning. We were talking about a situation we're dealing with on a foreign policy issue. And it came into, the question became, could we get certain material in and out of this particular area? And we started talking about infrastructure. And he made the same point that a lot of you probably have made. If I blindfolded you and took you into an airport in China or Hong Kong, and you looked around, and I asked you where you were, assuming it was totally empty, most of you would say, well, this must be America. Or if I took you into Singapore, if I took you 100 places around the world. No, it's not. The most modern airports in the world are in other parts of the world. The most modern ports in the world are in other parts of the world. Why do some of our friends not understand why we became such a great nation? Just up the Hudson River, and old Harriman's old man went out and built the Transcontinental Railroad. Generated billions of dollars in revenue. There's a New York tradition that started with one of your predecessors, DeWitt Clinton. He built the Erie Canal. It wasn't a damaged infrastructure. It was a need for a whole new infrastructure for a new world. It literally opened the West. My father-in-law, my deceased wife's dad from Auburn, New York, used to say, we made a big mistake. We had a choice. I know there's true. We had a choice for the state prison or the canal. We chose the prison. But think about it, though. Think about it. Had the foresight, I think it was in, 1813 or 1817, sometime in that range, to build the Erie Canal. What'd you have? You had, you come along, you had two mayors. A mayor of Brooklyn before it was united with New York. It was part of New York City, and the mayor of New York. They went out and they built a thing called the Brooklyn Bridge in 1883. Some would suggest that's why they became one city, but in 1883. It was a marvel. It was new. It wasn't refurbishing some old bridge. Franklin Roosevelt, former governor of this great state, to state the obvious, he provided in the midst of the Depression the funding for the Triborough Bridge, now the JFK Bridge, the Henry Hudson Parkway, the Grand Central Parkway. Does anybody think New York would have developed into what it is, New York, Manhattan would have developed into what it is today without the federal government and the state government investing in infrastructure? Businesses locate where they have the capacity to quickly communicate, quickly export, quickly and cheaply engage in commerce. That's also why in the Recovery Act, we put in $48 billion, $48 billion for infrastructure. Built hundreds and hundreds of miles. It was the single largest public works project since Eisenhower building the interstate highway system. And for those critics who say you can't be done, government cannot be trusted with that kind of money to do the job, every independent organization, including the GAO, pointed out that less than 0.5% resulted in waste or fraud. Even my Republican friends acknowledge that, including the chairman of the committee from California. So this can be done, and it must be done, because otherwise we're going to be left behind. We're going to be left behind. The competition in the 21st century is different. But you got a governor who understands why the Empire State became known as the Empire State, and apparently is determined to keep it the Empire State. Right. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. I wish everybody could see this presentation. I wish everybody could see this presentation. And that's why, I might add, the president is calling for another $50 billion in infrastructure spending. The last piece that I haven't mentioned is, this all results in economic growth. Economic growth. Not merely the jobs that are provided, decent jobs, middle-class jobs, jobs you can raise a family on. Middle class is not a number. It's a value set. It's being able to own your home and not just rent it. Live in a neighborhood that's safe. You can send your kid to a school that's decent. If the kid does well, you can get him to college. And maybe in the meantime, you'll be able to take care of your mom and dad and hope your children won't have to take care of you. But all depends on a job with a livable wage. That's what these jobs are. But more importantly, they generate new jobs. There's a reason why we've created over 550,000 new manufacturing jobs in the United States. Why is manufacturing coming home? We have the most productive workers, and that's a fact. That's not braggadocio. That is a fact. We have a legal system that protects one's interest. Contracts are upheld. Intellectual property is protected. And guess what? We have, and have had, up till now, an infrastructure that accommodates this. If you're going to build a new factory, you're going to build it in Hong Kong where you can get twice as many of your goods at half the price to the port, on the back of a ship, and to your customers? Or are you going to build it where there's an antiquated system? I'll close with this. The governor knows that we not only have to reimagine New York for a New York reality, we have to reimagine America for an American reality. And the reality is we've got to get back on our game. I'll give you one concrete example. I just went down to the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal is two lanes are being added and being widened. Right now, it can accommodate a ship that is 60 feet wide. 106 feet wide. They'll be able to accommodate a ship now that's 160 feet wide, carrying twice the cargo, twice the tonnage. 2/3 of every single ship that goes through that canal either are destined for or come from an American port. Yet these new Panamax ships, which are 261 feet high, are 160 feet wide, carry twice the cargo at half the cost, cannot berth in the vast majority of the ports from the Gulf of Mexico up to Maine, because we haven't dredged the harbors to a 50-foot draft, because we haven't accommodated the docks that allow for these massive new ships to come in. If we don't, that business will go elsewhere. part of the Recovery Act money, there's a place called New Baltimore in Ohio. It's sort of making your point, I hope, Gov. And during the Recovery Act, we went out there and said, we're going to put in one of the largest switching stations for railroads anywhere in the world, in the middle of these cornfields. Why? Because within 75 miles is some of the heartland of manufacturing in America, in the state of Ohio. And what we're doing is we are making sure that every train coming out of the Midwest is able to carry double-decker boxcars, reducing by 30% the cost of transportation for Whirlpool and other manufacturers out there. But we have to go, we have to do what you're doing. We have to raise the bridges. We have to hollow out the tunnels larger. We have to have a different system. But they'll be able to get to the Port of Baltimore in 1/3 the time with twice the cargo. And guess what? The Whirlpools of the world will stay and manufacture in the United States of America. Why? Because it makes economic sense. And if we don't do, the governor doesn't do what he's doing, if we don't do what we've begun to do, we are not going to lead the world in the 21st century, and the Empire State's going to become another state, not the Empire State. So, Governor, I am delighted to be able to be here with you today. I think your Rebuilding New York, Reimagining the Future is exactly what we have to do in this country. And once again, in the tradition of this state and the tradition of Andrew Cuomo, you're leading. You're not just leading in New York, you're leading the country. And I think a lot of governors and a lot of folks are going to learn an awful lot from what they see and what you do here. I know it's just begun, but I have no doubt you'll get it finished. And I am, as they say in our business, at least in the House and Senate, I associate myself with the gentleman from New York. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President, let me say in closing, first, how heartfelt your comments are. We thank you on behalf of all New Yorkers for your advocacy of the infrastructure. You are exactly right. We know as New Yorkers how important infrastructure is in construction. All of New York is a built space, and what we built made us the Empire State. So we truly appreciate that. I don't want to give away news from tomorrow, but you're exactly right about the airports. Even here in New York, the LaGuardia, JFK are inexcusable, frankly, that they have not been redeveloped to keep pace with the best international airports, and that's something that we're going to attend to. But thank you for today. You know, Sandy, Irene, Lee, we have had a very tough few years. You're right that New Yorkers are courageous. I'll tell you what I really took to heart. Yes, we're courageous, and they talk about tough New Yorkers, and we're tough. We can be tough, but we are also a kind, generous, loving people. And you had to see the way New Yorkers came together after Sandy and Irene and Lee. They were just there one for another. It was a really beautiful demonstration of community in the purest form, and it made me so proud to be governor of this state when you see how people reached out to help other people. And that's also one of the beautiful dimensions of the New York personality that people sometimes overlook. It was tough, but we have a plan. We took our time. With your help, we designed the plan, and now we're going to get to work. We know how to work. We're from hard work, and we have the plan, and we're going to go, and we're going to do it together as a unified government. Speaker Silver is a good assemblyman. He's not bad with a hammer and nails. You have to see Dean Skelos is a pretty good electrician. We're going to rebuild this state. You come here 12 months from now, and you're going to be impressed with everything we did, thanks to you and the partnership. Thank you. Thank you.